They offered her for half price, but no one dared bid, until a lone cowboy raised his hand. The sun was climbing slowly over the horizon, casting long golden rays across the dusty streets of the small Texas town. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the sound of hooves on wooden planks was as common as the wind rustling through dry grass. On this particular morning, the town square was busier than usual. Wagons creaked, men tipped their hats to one another, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sharp scent of leather from saddles and boots. People had come from miles around for the weekly cattle and horse auction, an event that was both a social gathering and a business opportunity. It was the one day when farmers and ranchers, rough from work on the land, dressed a little sharper, polished their boots, and tried to look as confident as possible. Among the crowd, there was a buzz of excitement that came with the promise of rare finds. Horses, cows, and even a few stray dogs had been brought to the auction grounds. There was laughter, haggling, and the occasional shout as someone tried to show off a strong, healthy animal. Yet in the corner of the lot, standing slightly apart from the others, was a horse that drew attention without trying. She was young, no more than 2 years old, with a coat as dark and smooth as a midnight sky. Her eyes were bright, alert, and wary. She shifted her weight nervously from one hoof to the other, her ears flicking at every movement, every sound. She had not been trained properly, the auctioneer explained, but there was something about her that made people stop and stare. Despite her beauty, no one seemed interested. Rumors had a way of traveling faster than the wind in this town, and this horse carried a story that made people uneasy. She had been abandoned by her previous owner, left alone in a distant pasture where she struggled to survive. Some said she had been difficult, temperamental, or unlucky, though no one could say for certain what had happened. In a town where superstition still lingered behind the rows of saloons and general stores, people were hesitant to take a risk. They feared what they didn't understand, and a horse with an uncertain past was something many could not handle. The auctioneer, a man whose voice could carry across the entire lot even without a microphone, tried to keep the mood light. He described the horse's features in detail, her strong legs, her sleek coat, and the energy that seemed to hum just beneath her skin. He mentioned her age, her lineage, and her potential, but with each attempt to encourage bidding, silence filled the air. The usual chatter of excitement was replaced by nervous whispers. People exchanged uneasy glances and shook their heads, their hesitation growing with every passing minute. Some muttered about bad luck, others about trouble, and a few just shrugged and walked away, convinced she was not worth the gamble. Time seemed to stretch on as the auctioneer raised his voice again. "All right, folks," he said, his tone slightly more urgent now. "She's a fine young mare and there's a lot of potential here. Let's start the bidding at half price. Who's ready to make a deal?" Even with the price cut, the crowd stayed silent. Hearts that might have leapt at the chance to own a promising horse seemed frozen in fear or doubt. Some shook their heads and muttered excuses, while others leaned on the fences and watched, curious but unwilling to act. It was as if the air itself had thickened with hesitation. The horse's ears twitched, sensing the tension around her. She stamped her hoof lightly and let out a soft snort as if to protest that no one could see her true worth. Among the spectators, a few men whispered to each other. "Why isn't anyone bidding?" one asked. "She's beautiful, strong, and just a young girl," another replied. But even their words lacked conviction, carrying only uncertainty. The stories of her past seemed to overshadow her present promise, creating an invisible barrier that kept potential buyers at bay. The auctioneer paused, looking out at the crowd, his brow furrowed slightly. He was used to quiet moments at auctions, but the silence this horse inspired was unusual. He tried a different approach, painting pictures with his words. He spoke of the joy of raising a young horse, of the bond between human and animal, and of the possibilities that lay ahead if someone were brave enough to take her home. Still, no one raised a hand. The horse shifted nervously, her muscles tense, as if she could feel the doubts of the crowd pressing down on her. The sun climbed higher, glinting off her dark coat, and for a moment she seemed almost to glow. Her eyes scanned the crowd, meeting the gaze of people who looked away quickly, uncomfortable under the weight of her stare. She snorted again, and a thin cloud of dust rose from the ground beneath her hooves. The silence lingered, heavy and uncomfortable, stretching longer with every passing second. As the minutes dragged on, the auctioneer sighed and lowered his voice. "I'll offer her for half the original price," he said, his tone a mixture of patience and frustration. "I'll say it again, half price. Who will give this young mare a chance?" The crowd remained still. Not a single hand was raised. The horse pawed the ground once more, her energy restless, and the murmur of voices faded into an awkward quiet. Some people shifted uncomfortably on their feet, unsure whether to speak or simply leave. The horse's tail flicked anxiously, her body tense, and it seemed as if even she understood the moment. No one believed in her yet. In that silence, there was one figure who stood apart from the rest. A lone cowboy, tall and lean, with a weathered hat shading his eyes and boots caked with the dust of long rides, watched the horse intently. Unlike the others, he did not whisper, nor did he turn away. He studied her carefully, noticing the way her muscles moved beneath her sleek coat, the intelligence in her eyes, and the spark of life that others had missed. Where the town saw a risk, he saw potential. Where they saw fear, he saw spirit. And where they saw abandonment, he saw a chance for connection. He adjusted his hat, shifted his weight, and considered the moment. The crowd might have feared what they didn't know, but he had spent years reading animals, understanding them, and learning to trust his instincts. And his instincts were telling him something simple. This horse was special. Finally, with quiet confidence, he raised his hand. The movement was small, almost understated, but it immediately drew the attention of the auctioneer and the entire crowd. Gasps and whispers rippled through the spectators. "Did he just bid?" someone asked. "On her?" Another shook his head in disbelief. The horse's ears pricked forward, sensing a change in the energy around her. There was hope now, a subtle shift that even she could feel. The auctioneer's eyes widened slightly, and a broad smile broke across his face. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Looks like we have a bidder." The crowd leaned forward, suddenly more interested, though still uncertain. They watched with bated breath as the lone cowboy, calm and deliberate, confirmed his intention. He had recognized something that the rest of the town could not see. He had taken the first step where others hesitated. The horse pawed the ground again, this time with a subtle excitement. She seemed to understand, in her own way, that someone had seen her not for her past or the rumors, but for who she truly was. The tension that had filled the air for hours began to lift, replaced by a quiet energy of possibility. The auctioneer's voice rang out, clear and steady, calling for confirmation of the bid. And with that simple act, the course of the horse's life and the cowboy's was about to change forever. After the auction ended, the lone cowboy, whose name was Tom McAllister, guided the young mare out of the crowded lot. The chatter of townsfolk faded behind them, replaced by the crunch of dirt under their boots and hooves. Tom had purchased her for a price that others wouldn't touch, and though the deal was done, he knew that owning a horse was only the beginning. It was what came next, earning her trust, teaching her and forming a bond that would truly matter. Tom led her through the narrow streets of the town toward the trail that led to his ranch. The mare's ears flicked constantly, listening to every sound, the distant bark of a dog, the creak of a wagon wheel, the occasional shout from a passing neighbor. She shifted nervously, her tail flicking back and forth. Though she had never seen Tom before, she seemed to sense that he was different. There was no rush in his movements, no harshness in his tone. He spoke to her quietly, almost in a whisper, using the kind of soft commands he had learned over years of working with animals. "You're safe now," Tom said gently, running a calloused hand along her sleek coat. "I'm not gonna hurt you, I just want to help you." The mare didn't respond with words, of course, but her body language slowly began to change. She stopped flicking her tail as often and allowed him to walk beside her without pulling away. Tom noticed the small signs, understanding them instinctively. In animals, even the tiniest shift could mean trust or fear, interest or apprehension. And though the road ahead would be long and challenging, he saw a spark in her that told him she wanted to connect. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The ranch lay on a wide stretch of land, dotted with wooden fences, open pastures, and a few scattered barns. Tom led the mare to a small corral near the main barn. She hesitated at the entrance, her ears swiveling nervously, but Tom's calm presence encouraged her forward. He opened the gate and stepped back, giving her space to move. For a moment she froze. Her eyes scanned every corner, every fence post, and every shadow, but slowly she took a cautious step inside. Tom didn't rush her. He knew that fear could never be overcome with force. Patience was the only way. He had worked with horses before, and experience had taught him that the most stubborn, skittish animals often became the most loyal companions. The first days at the ranch were a test for both of them. The mare was nervous, shy, and sometimes defiant. She would paw at the ground, toss her head, or even take off in sudden bursts, testing Tom's patience. He responded not with anger, but with calm consistency. He spent hours beside her, walking slowly, speaking softly, and offering gentle touches. Sometimes he would simply sit on the ground nearby, letting her approach on her own terms. One morning, Tom decided it was time to try leading her outside the corral. He clipped a simple halter onto her head, taking care not to tug too hard. The mare flinched at the unfamiliar sensation, pulling back slightly, but Tom stayed steady. He didn't force her forward. Instead, he began to walk slowly, encouraging her to follow. Step by step, she moved with him, though her muscles were tense and her eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. Tom noticed her reactions and adjusted his approach. When she hesitated at a fence, he slowed down. When she snorted and shook her head, he waited patiently, offering reassuring words. Over time, she began to realize that he was not a threat, that his guidance was steady, and that she could trust him to lead her safely. With each small success, her confidence grew. She began to trot lightly beside him, her movements more relaxed, and even nudged his hand gently as if acknowledging his presence. The nights at the ranch were quieter, yet they presented their own challenges. The mare was not used to the sounds of coyotes in the distance, the creaking of old barns, or the wind rustling through dry grass. She would startle at sudden noises, bolting or tossing her head. Tom would stay by her side, holding her gently until she calmed. He understood that trust was built slowly, through repeated demonstrations of safety and patience. On the third day, Tom decided it was time to introduce her to the idea of carrying a saddle. He chose a lightweight, well-padded saddle, carefully placing it on her back. The mare froze at first, ears pinned slightly back. She snorted and shifted her weight nervously. Tom spoke softly, rubbing her neck and shoulders, letting her feel his calm energy. Slowly, she allowed him to adjust the straps, and though she moved uneasily at first, she did not panic. By the end of the day, she stood still with the saddle in place, a small but significant step toward trust. As days turned into weeks, Tom and the mare developed a rhythm. He learned her quirks, the way she twitched her ears when alert, the way she stamped her hooves when impatient, and the subtle signs that told him she was ready to follow. She learned his signals, responding to gentle tugs on the reins, soft words, and guiding gestures. Their bond deepened, not through domination or fear, but through mutual understanding and respect. Tom also introduced her to other animals on the ranch. At first, she was wary of the older horses, keeping her distance and watching them with suspicion. But gradually, curiosity overcame fear. She sniffed noses with the other horses, tested boundaries gently, and even began to play in the open pastures. Tom watched with quiet satisfaction as she explored her new world, knowing that each step forward was a victory. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with golden and crimson hues, Tom rode alongside her for the first time. He had prepared meticulously, ensuring that she was calm and receptive. With a gentle nudge, he encouraged her to move forward. At first, her steps were cautious, but with every stride, she gained confidence. They moved across the pasture together, as if learning the rhythm of each other's movements. The wind ruffled her mane, and her ears flicked forward in alertness, yet there was a sense of calm determination in her eyes. The townsfolk who had once whispered about her past would have been astonished to see the transformation. The horse that had been abandoned, feared, and ignored was now alive with purpose, energy, and trust. And the cowboy who had raised his hand at the auction was proving that belief and patience could overcome doubt and fear. By the end of the first month, the mare had become an inseparable companion to Tom. He often found himself talking to her as he worked around the ranch, sharing his thoughts, recounting stories of the town, and even telling her about the auction where no one had dared bid. She would listen, her ears swiveling toward him, sometimes nudging his hand, as if responding in her own quiet way. It was during these long, quiet evenings that the bond between them deepened most. There was no rush, no agenda, just the gentle rhythm of companionship. Tom would sit under the wide Texas sky, the mare standing nearby, her dark coat glinting in the fading light. Stars would appear one by one, and in that calm the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. He could feel her trust, and she could sense his care. It was a connection built slowly, patiently, and with understanding that went beyond words. Tom knew that challenges were still ahead. She was still young, and life on a ranch was never easy. There would be moments of fear, stubbornness, and testing. But he also knew that together, they could face anything. The spark that had caught his eye at the auction was still alive, stronger than ever, and it was fueled by their growing trust and partnership. In those early days, Tom often thought about the auction crowd, the men and women who had hesitated to bid, and the whispers that had filled the air. They had seen only the past, the rumors, and the unknown. But he had seen what they could not, a horse full of potential, spirit, and intelligence. And through patience, care, and quiet guidance, he was helping her become the horse she was always meant to be. The mare had come to the ranch as a symbol of doubt and fear, abandoned and overlooked. But with Tom's steady hand and gentle heart, she was slowly learning that the world was not as frightening as she had been led to believe. She was discovering safety, companionship, and the possibility of a new beginning. And in turn, Tom was reminded of the power of trust, patience, and seeing beyond the surface to the true potential within. By the end of that first month, the mare was no longer the timid, anxious horse that had arrived from the auction. She had learned to walk with confidence, respond to gentle commands, and begin trusting the world around her. Tom had earned her trust, and she had taught him the rewards of patience and understanding. Together, they were ready to face the challenges of ranch life, step by step, day by day, as partners united by respect and the promise of a shared journey. The weeks turned into months at Tom McAllister's ranch, and the bond between him and the young mare grew stronger with every sunrise. What had started as cautious steps in a dusty corral evolved into daily routines filled with lessons, patience, and quiet triumphs. Tom knew that training a horse was never simple. It required consistency, understanding, and the willingness to listen as much as to lead. Each day brought new challenges, and each challenge offered an opportunity for growth for both of them. The mare, whose name Tom had decided would be Midnight, had begun to trust him fully. Her fear and skittishness were slowly replaced by curiosity and confidence. Yet trust was only the first step. Tom needed to teach her the language of the ranch, the commands that would guide her safely, and the skills that would prepare her for riding, work, and life alongside other horses. Every morning, as the sun rose, he would lead her out into the pasture, halter in hand, and begin the lessons that would shape her into a capable and confident horse. The early training was focused on basic commands: walking, stopping, turning, and responding to gentle cues. At first, Midnight was unsure. She would pause abruptly, stamp her hooves, or shake her head, testing Tom's patience. But he never raised his voice or forced her. He understood that fear could undo all progress, and he relied on calm words, soft touches, and steady movements. "Easy, girl," he would whisper, "just one step at a time." Sometimes he would even sit on the ground, letting her come to him, teaching her that he was a guide, not a threat. One morning, Tom decided it was time for Midnight to learn to cross a small stream that ran through the pasture. She froze at the edge, her eyes wide with uncertainty. The water shimmered in the sunlight, and the sound of it splashing over rocks made her nervous. Tom stayed by her side, crouching slightly, speaking gently. "It's all right, just a few steps, I'm right here." He encouraged her with soft pats on her shoulder and patient nudges. Step by step, she dipped a hoof into the water, then another. Her muscles tensed, but she moved forward, trusting Tom to guide her safely. By the time she reached the other side, she shook her mane, tossing her head in excitement, as if proud of herself. Tom smiled, knowing this small victory marked a big step in their partnership. Training was not without setbacks. There were days when Midnight would refuse to move, snort loudly, or even try to bolt. Sometimes she would panic at the sight of a bird flying overhead or a sudden gust of wind. On those days, Tom would take a step back, letting her calm down before attempting the lesson again. He learned to read her signals carefully, the flick of an ear, the tension in her muscles, the way she shifted her weight. Every sign was important. Patience was not optional, it was essential, and over time she learned that his calm and steady presence meant she could take risks safely. As trust grew, Tom began teaching her more advanced skills. He introduced gentle trotting, transitions from walk to trot, and responding to subtle shifts of weight in the saddle. Midnight was initially unsure, struggling to maintain balance and rhythm. But with repetition, encouragement, and small rewards like pats and soothing words, she began to improve. Each successful trot was celebrated, each small victory reinforcing her confidence and their bond. Tom also wanted Midnight to become comfortable with other horses. There were older, more experienced mares on the ranch who moved with confidence and authority. At first, Midnight kept her distance, unsure of how to interact. But Tom would lead her slowly toward the group, letting her observe from a safe distance. Over time, she learned to mingle, to walk alongside the other horses, and even to play gently in the open pastures. These interactions taught her social skills, helping her feel like part of a community rather than an isolated, fearful animal. One particularly memorable day, a sudden storm rolled in over the plains. Dark clouds gathered, lightning flashed, and the wind whipped across the ranch. Midnight froze, her eyes wide with fear as the first drops of rain fell. Tom stayed close, his calm presence grounding her. He spoke softly, stroking her neck, leading her toward the barn. Step by step, she followed, trusting him to guide her through the storm. By the time they reached shelter, she had learned an important lesson. That fear could be faced with patience, trust, and the guidance of someone who cared. Through these experiences, Tom also learned a lot about Midnight. She had a sharp mind and a strong spirit. She was quick to notice changes in his tone, movements, and body language. She could sense his intentions, sometimes even before he acted. This intelligence made training both challenging and rewarding. Tom had to stay alert, adjusting his approach, anticipating her reactions, and celebrating her successes. It was a dynamic partnership built on respect and understanding rather than dominance or fear. As months passed, Midnight's confidence grew. She learned to respond to more complex commands, navigate obstacles, and move with fluidity and grace. Tom introduced a saddle again, this time ensuring that she was fully comfortable. She learned to accept the weight and pressure without panic, standing calmly as he adjusted the straps and ensured everything was secure. Then came the first rides. Tom mounted slowly, guiding her step by step, speaking reassuringly as she adjusted to the sensation. At first, her steps were hesitant, her muscles tense, but she gradually learned to move with him, finding balance and rhythm. The real breakthroughs came not just in the physical skills, but in the emotional bond they had formed. Midnight had learned to trust completely, following Tom's guidance without fear. Tom had learned to read her like a book, understanding her moods, reactions, and preferences. They communicated in subtle ways, a shift of weight, a gentle nudge, a soft word, and each day their connection deepened. Tom also began to challenge Midnight with tasks that tested her coordination and focus. He set up small obstacle courses with logs, poles, and gentle jumps. She approached each task cautiously at first, unsure of what was expected. But with his encouragement, she learned to navigate the course successfully. Each success reinforced her confidence and reinforced the lesson that learning could be rewarding, not frightening. Life on the ranch continued with its mix of routine and adventure. Tom would ride alongside her through open pastures, across streams, and over gentle hills. Midnight became adept at responding to his commands, moving gracefully and confidently. She began to anticipate his intentions, sometimes moving before he gave a signal, a sign of their deepening connection. Tom would often watch her in quiet moments, marveling at her growth, from a nervous, abandoned horse to a capable, spirited companion. There were moments of humor as well. Midnight had a playful side, occasionally tossing her head, kicking up dust, or chasing a passing bird. Tom would laugh, sometimes shaking his head at her antics, but always maintaining patience. He knew that part of building trust was allowing her to express herself, to learn through exploration and play. These moments brought joy to both of them, reinforcing the bond that had grown from patience and understanding. By the end of the training period, Midnight had transformed completely. She was no longer the timid, fearful horse that had arrived from the auction. She was strong, confident, and intelligent, capable of navigating obstacles, responding to commands, and riding with ease. The bond between her and Tom was unshakable, a partnership built on trust, patience, and mutual respect. Tom often reflected on the journey. He remembered the auction where no one dared bid, the whispers of doubt, and the hesitation of the townsfolk. They had seen only a young horse with an uncertain past. He had seen potential, spirit, and intelligence. Through careful guidance, patience, and trust, he had helped Midnight realize her abilities. Together, they had overcome fear, built skills, and formed a connection that went beyond words. The lessons extended beyond training. Tom had learned about perseverance, empathy, and the rewards of seeing potential where others saw risk. Midnight had learned to trust, to face her fears, and to grow into a confident, capable horse. Their partnership was a testament to what could be achieved when patience, care, and understanding guided every step. Even in quiet moments, their connection was evident. Midnight would nuzzle Tom's hand, follow him across the pasture, and respond to his subtle cues. They moved together with a rhythm that spoke of deep understanding. The ranch, once a place of isolation for a young, abandoned horse, had become a home, a training ground, and a space for growth and companionship. And so, as the sun set over the plains, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink, Tom and Midnight stood together in the open pasture. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had also been rewarding, full of lessons learned and trust earned. They had faced fear, built skills, and formed a bond that was unbreakable. The horse that had been overlooked, feared, and abandoned had become a symbol of resilience, potential, and the rewards of belief in what others might not see. Together, Tom and Midnight were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, confident in their abilities and strengthened by the trust they had built. The world outside the ranch might still doubt her, but Tom knew the truth. Midnight was extraordinary, and their partnership was a story of patience, courage, and the power of seeing beyond fear to the possibilities within. The months of training, patience, and careful guidance had transformed Midnight from a fearful, abandoned horse into a confident and spirited companion. But Tom McAllister knew that the true test of her growth would come not just on the quiet pastures of the ranch, but in the wider world, where other horses, riders, and spectators could see what she had become. For this reason, he decided to enter her in the regional rodeo that took place every spring in the neighboring town. The rodeo was a bustling event, drawing crowds from across the county, filled with cheering spectators, lively music, and the energetic chaos of animals and humans alike. From the moment they arrived at the rodeo grounds, Midnight was alert, her ears flicking to every sound and movement. The crowds, the loud voices, and the unfamiliar horses could have overwhelmed her, but she was different now. She had learned to trust Tom completely. When he spoke to her softly, nudging her gently with his hand or shifting his weight in the saddle, she responded without hesitation. There was no fear, only focus and a quiet excitement. Tom had prepared her for this moment, and now it was time to see if all their work would shine in front of an audience. The rodeo arena was surrounded by cheering spectators, their excitement palpable in the warm afternoon air. Vendors called out from the sidelines, and the smell of popcorn and leather filled the space. Other horses and riders were moving through the course, showing off their skills with precision and confidence. For many horses, the noise and activity could be distracting or frightening. For Midnight, however, it was an opportunity to demonstrate everything she had learned. Tom led her into the arena slowly, giving her a moment to adjust, letting her feel the firmness of the ground beneath her hooves and the presence of the crowd around her. The first event was a simple obstacle course designed to test agility, balance, and responsiveness. Tom guided Midnight toward the first hurdle, giving her gentle encouragement. She approached it cautiously at first, her muscles tense, but she remembered the lessons learned at the ranch, the patience, the confidence, and the trust in her partner. With a leap that was smooth and precise, she cleared the hurdle without hesitation. The crowd, initially quiet in curiosity, erupted in applause. Tom smiled beneath his hat, feeling a sense of pride that he could barely put into words. Midnight was proving herself not just to the audience, but to herself. As the course continued, they moved through tight turns, weaving between cones and navigating small jumps. Midnight moved with grace and confidence, responding to the slightest signals from Tom. Each movement reflected months of careful training and the deep bond they had built. The crowd began to take notice, whispering to one another about the dark-coated horse who moved with such precision and calm. Some spectators leaned forward in awe, while others clapped, clearly impressed by the partnership unfolding before their eyes. Tom guided her through each challenge with patience, giving her small moments of reassurance when needed. At one point, Midnight paused briefly at a narrow passage between two fences, unsure if she could fit through. Tom gently stroked her neck and whispered, "You can do it, girl." "I'm right here." With a careful step, she moved forward, sliding through the narrow space with perfect control. The crowd cheered again, this time louder and more enthusiastic, as they began to recognize the horse's skill and intelligence. The next event tested speed and responsiveness. Tom encouraged Midnight to trot, then canter, and finally sprint along a marked path. Midnight responded immediately, her powerful legs moving in perfect rhythm, her mane flowing behind her in the wind. Spectators clapped, whistled, and cheered at every turn. She was no longer just a horse at a rodeo. She was a performer, a competitor, and a testament to what trust, patience, and hard work could achieve. Tom's pride was evident in the way he sat tall in the saddle, guiding her with gentle precision, celebrating each success as it came. Throughout the events, other riders and spectators could see the depth of the bond between the cowboy and the horse. Every step, turn, and jump was guided not by force, but by understanding and communication. Midnight moved with a confidence that came not only from training, but from the trust she had in Tom. And Tom, in turn, relied on her instincts, her attentiveness, and her growing intelligence. Together, they created a harmony that was rare, almost magical to witness. By the final event of the day, it was clear that Midnight was not only skilled but remarkable. She had conquered the obstacles, navigated the course with grace, and responded flawlessly to every command. Tom slowed her to a trot, giving her time to catch her breath and settle after the long series of challenges. The crowd erupted into applause, some standing in admiration of the incredible horse that had arrived months earlier from an abandoned pasture, once overlooked and feared. Midnight pranced lightly in place, ears flicking toward Tom, as if sharing the triumph with him. The judges approached Tom and congratulated him, praising both his skill as a trainer and Midnight's performance. For Tom, the recognition was gratifying, but what mattered most was the look in Midnight's eyes, the quiet satisfaction and pride that only an animal could express. She had overcome fear, mastered new skills, and faced challenges that would have daunted many others. And she had done it with patience, courage, and the bond she shared with her cowboy. Word of their performance spread quickly throughout the town and beyond. Those who had once whispered about her at the auction were now in awe, amazed that the horse they had feared and dismissed was now a champion in her own right. People came to the ranch to see her, to witness the connection between horse and rider, and to hear the story of how patience and belief had transformed a life. Midnight became a symbol of resilience, courage, and the rewards of trust. At the ranch, life returned to its quiet rhythm, but there was a new energy in the air. Midnight moved confidently through the pastures, interacting with other horses with ease, responding to Tom's commands with grace, and carrying herself with the poise of a horse who had learned her strength. Tom continued to train her not out of necessity, but out of the joy of partnership. They explored new trails, practiced new skills, and strengthened their connection with every passing day. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Tom sat on a fence, watching Midnight gallop freely across the pasture. Her dark coat shimmered in the fading light, and her movements were fluid, confident, and joyful. He remembered the auction, the doubts of the townsfolk, and the silence that had greeted her name. He thought about the months of work, the small victories, and the challenges they had overcome together. And he realized that the true reward was not the applause, the recognition, or even the victories in competition. It was the bond they had built, the trust earned, and the partnership that had grown stronger with every challenge faced together. Visitors to the ranch often asked Tom how he had transformed a frightened, abandoned horse into the confident, skilled animal they saw before them. His answer was always the same: patience, understanding, and belief in potential. She wasn't just a horse, he would say. She was a teacher, a partner, and a reminder that fear can be overcome when someone shows you the way with care. And Midnight, in her own quiet way, seemed to understand. She would nuzzle his hand, follow him across the pasture, or respond to a subtle signal, showing that the lessons were not just learned. They were shared, understood, and cherished. Over time, their story became a part of the town's history. People would recount the tale of the auction where no one dared bid, the lone cowboy who raised his hand, and the horse who transformed into a symbol of courage and resilience. Children visiting the ranch would watch in awe as Midnight moved gracefully across the pastures, imagining the journey that had brought her from fear to confidence. Farmers and ranchers shared the story as an example of patience and belief, and the horse became more than an animal. She became a legend in her own right. Tom continued to ride, train, and care for Midnight, knowing that their partnership was built on more than skill or training. It was built on respect, trust, and a deep understanding of each other's strengths, fears, and potential. Together, they had faced uncertainty, doubt, and challenges, and they had emerged stronger, more confident, and inseparable. And so, the horse that had been offered for half price at a dusty auction and dismissed by an entire crowd became a symbol of hope and determination. Midnight was proof that with patience, care, and belief in someone's potential, fear could be transformed into courage, hesitation into confidence, and doubt into accomplishment. Tom and Midnight's story endured, a reminder that even the most overlooked and uncertain beginnings could lead to greatness, and that true partnership is forged in trust, respect, and shared triumphs. As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky with golden and pink hues, Tom and Midnight stood together in the pasture, ready to face whatever adventures lay ahead. Their journey was far from over, but they had proven to themselves, and to the world, that even the most fragile beginnings could lead to extraordinary outcomes when patience, belief, and courage guided every step.